What you're about to see tonight on Blaze TV is some of the most hair-raising things I think we've ever presented, because these are not somewhere in the future. These situations have already happened, and they could happen to you. But the great thing about Blaze TV specials is we are not trying just to give you the problem. We are trying tonight, for sure, to give you solutions as well, to better equip you with what you need to do if the FBI comes knocking. All of this entire special can be found at blazetv.com. If you haven't become a member yet, please do. It's our best way of keeping in touch with you, and you will see unedited, free speech on Blaze TV. If you'd like to become a member, please join us at blazetv.com/Glenn and use the promo code STANDUP.
Tyranny has been around for as long as evil has existed. Since the beginning of time, brutal tyrants have used their reign to not only control the civilians living underneath their iron fist, but also to slaughter them en masse. But tyranny has morphed. It's transformed since its early days into something more complex, something more intelligent, something more easily disguised. The tyrants here, at home, have no other choice. Americans won't stand for brutal, vicious taking of our rights and our freedoms. So today's tyrants are doing it slowly, methodically, and secretively instead. And tonight, I'm going to show you exactly how. I'm going to share with you the 4 incredible stories from everyday Americans, moms, dads, small business owners, conservatives, and liberals that prove that tyranny is alive and well in America, no matter how well our leaders are able to hide it. But thankfully, Americans have something all those who were forced to bend the knee did not: a constitution, a Bill of Rights, rule of law. So what's the first step in fighting tyranny? Knowing those rights. Knowing what those who reign above us can and cannot do. Because these photos, these stories that I'll share with you tonight, these victims of tyranny, could easily be you. Tonight, targets of tyranny. How to survive being an enemy of the state. Hello, America, and welcome to the Mercury Studios. The very fact that we have to do this show, to me, speaks volumes about where we are currently as a nation. I said at one point, you won't recognize your country anymore. Are you there yet? We used to be a nation of fundamental rights. That's what brought us together, the Bill of Rights, and they were granted to us by God. And government was instituted among men to protect those rights. And we lived under a system of laws that promised justice, not social justice, justice. What does American justice even mean anymore? Was it justice when Steve Bannon was sentenced to 4 months in prison for contempt of Congress? Now, we've seen people defy Congress for decades, but nobody ever goes to jail. Eric Holder comes to mind. Same thing, charged with the same thing as Steve Bannon. Lois Lerner. They didn't go to jail. In fact, the last time someone went to jail for this was back in 1961, and before that, it was 1948. It's extraordinarily rare, even though we've seen people openly defy Congress time after time after time. See, justice is not justice when it's selectively decided whether or not we're going to enforce the law. 4 months in jail. But in January 2021, the former FBI lawyer that got caught falsifying evidence to spy on a member of the president's staff, President Trump, was spared prison. In fact, just given a minor slap on the wrist. Is that justice? Do they even know what that means anymore? The judge's reasoning was that the FISA warrant probably would have gotten approved anyway. So yes, falsifying evidence is illegal, and we can agree on that at least, but no harm, no foul, because the warrant would have gone through anyway, probably. Isn't that a little like letting an armed robber go free for robbing a 7-Eleven because really the store would have gotten bumped off by somebody at some point? The Parkland school shooter is now looking at life in prison, but not the death penalty. He killed 17 people. 14 were kids. Is that justice? Alex Jones was recently ordered to pay the families of Sandy Hook victims $1.5 billion. When I first saw that, I thought of the movie Erin Brockovich. Do you remember that with Julia Roberts? The lawsuit against PG&E involving what amounted to the near destruction of an entire town and giving people cancer. That judgment at the time was considered massive. PG&E was ordered to pay $330 million. Their negligence gave people cancer. Alex Jones said stupid stuff on the internet. Yes, it's bad, but compare the two cases. Is that justice? By and large, the nation just sat there and watched as people like George Soros bought and paid for radical left-wing district attorneys all over the country. We wondered what they were up to as they methodically decriminalized crime. Violence has since erupted in city after city, and bit by bit, they perverted the American justice system. It's gotten to the point to where we can't even define what true justice is anymore. Doubt in the system at large is perhaps the entire purpose. And when we become confused at what legal versus what isn't legal, what wet versus what's dry, what burns and what is cool, we become numb, even to the obvious, to government tyranny. We'll take it on the chin. Why? Because in the end, you won't know the difference. We are now on the same road that every empire has been on that has collapsed. We are also on the exact same road in which every evil dictator has been at the end of this road. We're seeing the danger signs, the things that are happening now. They are things that you will not find in the Constitution. You will find them in the Declaration of Independence, but that's the stuff that the kings did to cause the founders to put their foot down and say, no more. We are the only country in the world that has these things written down. And speaking of that, I mentioned justice. But what about those pesky rights granted to us by God? Does the Bill of Rights actually mean anything anymore? Is the First Amendment anything but a dead letter when a group of pro-life protesters are arrested in North Carolina, not for blocking the door or anything, but just for praying outside? Does the First Amendment mean anything at all when other pro-life protesters are arrested for peacefully protesting in Tennessee and are later let go? Then the feds come in with full tactical gear, knocking at their doors. In the wake of Dobbs, they can try and tell me this isn't political retaliation. They can try, but we see where this is going. Does the Second and the Fourth Amendment still hold any value when the feds show up to people's homes and ask to see their firearms for no apparent reason? Was there probable cause? The ATF's explanation is that they simply noticed that he was recently buying guns. He bought a couple of guns. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, no, that's not probable cause. But the Bill of Rights carries a lot less weight than it once used to. But let's stick with the Fourth Amendment for a second. The government now can seize your finances and your property, and many times just off the appearance of a crime. Just the appearance. In 2017, Texas police made over $50 million off of something called civil asset forfeiture in multiple cases. Not everyone was even guilty or charged with a crime. In many cases, it takes years to try to get your stuff back, with the government fighting you tooth and nail at every turn. For most people, it's heads, the state wins, tails, you lose. Now, is that anyway what the founders intended for us to live? Of course they didn't. They didn't foresee an America, United States of America, that weaponized the federal police force like the ATF. They certainly never predicted a group of Christians would ever be arrested for praying. Tyrants are among us. And the question now is not what they have already done. That much is obvious. The question is, how bad is this going to get? You know, the cries of civil rights used to be the song of the liberators, people like Martin Luther King. But now the words civil rights are all too frequently invoked by tyrants looking to hack the Constitution. I'm saying this very specifically because what you have seen, what activist groups are trying to slip in under the radar, have you noticed? All in the name of civil rights. Groups like the ACLU are trying to ensure that the gender mutilation of children continues unabated. But it goes way beyond just radical activist groups. The state of Michigan is now trying to slip in their abortion amendment, the fundamental civil right of a child to receive gender-affirming care, and without the consent of the parents. They are seriously trying to make this a civil rights issue, and that will be used to strip us of our rights as parents. We will be the criminals for having the audacity to claim that we have the ultimate say when it comes to our children. Tyrants are allowed to exist when people they are trying to subjugate forget that they have fundamental rights that were granted not by the state, but by a higher power. They thrive when justice is questioned and the laws of the land stop being black and white and float in a haze of murky gray. But that right there provides the blueprint to stop tyranny dead in its tracks. The founders armed us with the tools we need to know how to stop this, if we know how to wield those tools. And that is what tonight's show is really all about. We don't know our Constitution. We don't know our Bill of Rights anymore. When the cops come knocking at your door, you don't know how to deal with them because you've never lived in this kind of country before. You're a law-abiding citizen. There is no institutional knowledge to pass on. We haven't lived in that kind of country since 1791, or if you lived before civil rights had their movement in the 1960s. What do you do when the feds show up at your door? What do you do when the government comes for your kids? What do you do when the government or police try to seize your property or your money? These are the kinds of questions that we're going to arm you for tonight. I'm going to introduce you to the people who have already experienced unbelievable tyranny firsthand. And I also have the experts here in the studio that will tell you exactly what to do, what to say, if the government ever comes for you next. Now, later, we're going to hear from a father who is in a fight for his life to protect his son's gender and even be able to have time with his son. We'll hear from a couple who had their home and business raided by the FBI. Even though they committed no crime, they still lost everything. We'll meet an FBI whistleblower who's fed up with all of the abuses that he has seen. And we'll hear from a gun shop owner who experienced a curious visit from the ATF. Black Metal Firearms Inspection arrived first thing in the morning one day last December.
So we put out our things, got everything ready, and started getting the books out for the investigator, Pamela Scott. And she just started doing her inspection. In the very beginning, it started off fairly benign, and it just got weirder and weirder as she took longer and longer with the inspection.
Weird. Like she started using her personal cell phone to take pictures of their gun logs. It is a terrifying story, but first, tonight, an example of civil asset forfeiture, which is a fancy legal term to help disguise what it actually is. The government stealing your money. Next. In 1892, a small island just off the coast of New York City opened its doors. Over 62 million immigrants entered, all looking for opportunities that were unmatched anywhere else in the world. Freedom, protection from tyranny, but also a home, a job, a better future for their children. But today, perhaps somebody should tell the millions of people around the world hoping to arrive on our shores and achieve that American dream, that our all-powerful government can take it all from you in an instant. Minneapolis, 2011. Amy met a man at the top of this escalator in her office building, and her life changed forever.
After we met, it was pretty quickly off to the races. We had so much in common. In fact, our mothers had gone to high school together in Ohio, which we didn't know. Carl and I had met when we were toddlers. About 6 months after we met, Carl got a job offer with a little startup that was part of Amazon called Amazon Web Services. And they asked him to move to Seattle to join the company, and Carl asked me to go with him.
2 years after making the move to Seattle, Carl and Amy married in the beautiful mountains of the Pacific Northwest.
And very quickly after that, we started growing our family.
Amy and Carl were exemplifying that American dream. Amy became an entrepreneur, and her company, The Riveter, hit $20 million in revenue. Carl had left Amazon and was experiencing amazing success as a real estate developer.
We saved our money to buy our first house, and we'd really planned to raise our family there, for our girls to grow. We were happy. I mean, we had worked so hard to get to where we were. We had really embraced that idea that you can build your own dreams and build your own life.
But then, just a couple of weeks after the COVID pandemic began here at home, Amy and Carl's dreams came to a screeching halt.
There was a knock at our door around 6:45 a.m. My 4 little girls were playing a little bouncy house in the living room. And it was a woman and a man, and the woman opened a wallet, and it was a badge, and it said FBI.
The agents gave Carl 2 letters. One accused him of a federal crime, and the second said that
they intended to seize a number of his bank accounts and some bank accounts that I shared with him. Did not know then, but learned very quickly that there is a practice in America called civil forfeiture.
Since 9/11, under just one program, police have taken $2.5 billion in the course of over 61,000 seizures of cash alone from people who, and this is the mind-blowing part, were not charged with a crime.
It's when government agencies can take everything you have,
Your bank accounts, your homes, your cars,
without ever charging you for a crime.
What do you do if you can't feed your kids? How do you even navigate talking to the FBI? Like, what happens then?
Carl did something only 2% of all Americans accused of a federal crime choose to do. He refused to cave. Well, that's when the FBI did everything they could to scare this young family into submission.
I checked my Wells Fargo bank account, and I logged on, and it was empty. And this was my account, just mine, where I put my earnings as a CEO, as a lawyer, and all the money was gone. And I've never been accused of a crime. I yelled for my husband to check his bank accounts, and everything was gone. So we had no money to feed our kids, to pay our mortgage, to pay Carl's lawyers. And that was designed so that Carl couldn't fight back.
They sold their home. Amy gave up her business, but it still wasn't enough.
One of the other tools that was used to coerce him to plead guilty was a constant threat from the Department of Justice that they were going to charge him with a crime, and that when they did, they would show up at our house in the middle of the night or the middle of the morning and drag him out at gunpoint in front of our 4 daughters. And I just didn't want them to see that. And so for many months, we would wake our daughters up, our 4 little girls, at 5 in the morning and take them to different parks all around Puget Sound. We tried to make it an adventure, but for us, I just didn't want them to be there if that was going to happen. Most of my daughters were too young to understand anything was happening. But my oldest daughter, Sloan, did understand that something was wrong. You know, I told Sloan, sometimes people with bad motivations and a lot of power can make very bad things happen to other people. And we explained to her that because someone had said Daddy did something bad without asking him, without verifying it, that the government had taken our money, and that because of that, we needed to sell our house and we were going to move and stay with family, but that Mommy and Daddy were going to fight. And we did. And I think, you know, that's the most important thing.
Amy and Carl fought, and they fought hard, and against all odds. In the ultimate David and Goliath battle, they proved to Sloan and her little sisters that the good guys can succeed, no matter how powerful the enemy may be.
Amy is with us. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Glenn.
You wrote me a letter. It said, I heard you mention my family this morning on your show. This is months ago. I'm a trained litigator turned entrepreneur, and this experience has been stunning at every turn. We've still never seen Amazon's allegations, which remain under seal. While the government held our money, we had to find ways to navigate legal fees and support our four very young daughters. As a litigator, were you prepared to know what to do when this started happening?
Absolutely not. I think very few lawyers really even know about or understand the practice of civil asset forfeiture.
So what did you do that you shouldn't have done? And I mean, we have no idea as an average citizen. I was talking about this with some friends last night. Somebody comes knocking at my door or somebody does this to me, I have no idea where to start.
I mean, I don't know that there is that much you can do. If we live in the modern world, we bank. And if we bank, we're at risk. Because in this country, the state governments and the federal government have a legal right to seize your money based on suspicion of a crime. My husband was never charged with a crime. It's been nearly 3 years.
So a lot of these things that we're talking about tonight come from political points of view, but you were a bundler for Obama.
I was. I think in my husband's case, so my husband was accused of a crime by Amazon. Amazon participated in breaking a contract. And the only way they could break that contract is if a guy on the other side pled guilty or committed a felony. And the very day that they kicked him out of the contract, Amazon lawyers were meeting with federal prosecutors.
You said to me, we were getting our makeup on, and you said to me, Amazon has a couple of things. And I said, well, they have all the money.
All the money.
But then you told me something else they have that I really didn't think of.
So, Amazon has incredible access to the Department of Justice and the federal government. Amazon Web Services, which is where the internet lives. The internet actually lives in big warehouses that are on the planet, not in the cloud. But Amazon actually holds all of our national security secrets. The CIA, the FBI, the NSA, They store the American warfighters' secrets in their data centers. And on top of that, on Amazon's board is the former head of the National Security Agency and the former Deputy Attorney General, Jamie Gorelick, who is Merrick Garland's mentor. They also are hiring former FBI agents and federal prosecutors by the dozens. There's over 100. And none of that makes sense to me why a company that sells retail goods on the internet needs all of that law enforcement firepower.
Where does your case stand?
So my husband was never charged, so that never happened.
So there is no case.
There was no case. Amazon's lawyers met with federal prosecutors over 100 times, trying to convince them to charge my husband with a crime, which I have a lot of questions as to how federal prosecutors had that much time to meet with Amazon's lawyers. But after Amazon asked the federal government to seize our family's assets and the federal government obliged, Amazon then sued my husband, knowing he had no money. And so that case, which Amazon has slowly dragged through the courts, even though they're the plaintiff, will finally go to trial in May, and my husband is very much looking forward to defending himself.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and telling the story. Let me introduce you to our panel here, as we have 3 legal and constitutional experts that will provide practical guidance in dealing with the scenarios that you're about to hear. We have Janine Younes. She is a litigation counsel for the New Civil Liberties Alliance in Washington, D.C. In 2020, she began voicing her opposition in media to what she calls unprecedented and intrusive COVID restrictions. She also argued a number of cases challenging the government and employer vaccine mandates. She is currently representing 5 California doctors in a crucial First Amendment case involving their right to talk about COVID and pass on information that they believe to their patients. We also have Andrew Flushy. He's a criminal defense lawyer based in Fredericksburg, Virginia. His law practice focuses on the most common ways regular citizens interact with the police, which are traffic stops. After repeatedly seeing clients fail to understand their rights and being led into convictions by the police, he started a YouTube channel to help educate the public on how to protect their liberties. And last but not least, Mitt Romney's favorite U.S. Senator, Mike Lee. This week, the state of Utah overwhelmingly re-elected Mike on a 3rd term as senator, and for good reason. There is no stronger defender of the U.S. Constitution in Congress than a man I hope will be a Supreme Court justice someday, Senator Mike Lee. Senator, welcome.
Thank you.
We're going to start with you on where does civil asset forfeiture come from, and what part of the Constitution is being violated?
It comes from the notion that if you have proceeds from illicit criminal activity, they were never yours to begin with. The problem with it is it gives the government to take money or other assets away from you and hold on to them until you prove your innocence. This completely flips on its head the presumption of innocence that's the hallmark characteristic of our criminal justice system. Now, there have been abuses of this. They've been so controversial that many states have either banned or severely restricted civil asset forfeiture by law. They've come up with a trick, and it's a trick that involves something that sounds innocuous called equitable sharing. It's a mechanism by which state authorities in states that have banned or restricted civil asset forfeiture can go to federal authorities, prompt a federal investigation, and then get up to 80% of the proceeds of that, with up to 20% or more of the proceeds going to the federal government. It's sort of government laundering money for government so that they can get away with that which is often prohibited under state law.
This started as a good thing, we thought, really under Reagan, wasn't it, for drugs and drug cartels?
Sure. Look, there are legitimate uses. There are potential legitimate uses for civil asset forfeiture. But it's become so abused that I think it does enormously more harm than good these days.
Okay, let's start with you, Janine. Where do we go with this? If you're in her situation, her husband's situation, what do you do?
Well, I would file a lawsuit arguing violation of due process. I mean, you have a right to your property, or not to be deprived of your property without due process of law. And here there was no due process whatsoever, no process whatsoever, no hearing, no charges.
You had to have thought of that. You're an attorney.
So in my husband's case, because criminal charges were never filed, the prosecutors had to file a civil lawsuit against our bank accounts. So we were not the defendants, our bank accounts were. But then, in our case...
What's this?
It's an in rem proceeding.
Okay.
They're literally suing the asset, not her.
Well, how is that possible? What does that even mean?
But it actually gets even better, because in the lawsuit, there was a complaint, but it was backed up by an affidavit from an FBI agent. The affidavit was under seal. It remains under seal even though we got our money back. So we have never seen what Amazon said my husband did.
This is really about Amazon not wanting to settle about a $100 million suit based on the contract, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so they'll crush you so they don't have to pay $100 million on something else.
Absolutely.
Anybody else want to take a stab at this?
First of all, I want to say that this case sends chills through my entire body, because it involves what can go wrong when you've got big business and big government merging together and reflecting the worst attributes of both enterprises. When one entity, in this case a business operation, controls that much data, and then it teams up with government, really bad things happen.
Really bad things happen. There's also a problem. I mean, you said when if you're in business, you're using a bank. My first thought, as you were speaking, is that's why you wouldn't use a bank. But then my second thought is, if I have my money in my house and the government ever decides to come in, they can easily claim, why would you have $50,000 in your house? It must be illegal.
Well, and indeed, 2 weeks after they seized our money, the FBI showed up at our house at 6:45 a.m. to do an armed search warrant in front of my daughters. So if we'd had cash there, we would have looked guilty.
Okay. I don't know what to do with this one. I think I think the questions are going to be coming from the audience later on how to protect ourselves from this. But I wish you the best of luck. The biggest thing you learned that you could share with us?
The biggest thing I learned is that often when someone is accused of a crime, attorneys and everyone in the world will tell you to be quiet, to not speak up. But in our case, in our family, we decided to use our voices. And I think it saved us, because I'm pretty sure that $1 trillion corporation teaming up with the government could destroy you if you were silent and stayed in your house and you just took it. But we took to Twitter, we took to talking to journalists, because I wanted everyone to hear our story. I don't want this to happen to anybody else. And I think the more that people learn about it, the less likely it is to happen, and the less likely bad actors like Amazon are to think that they can use it like they did with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Coming up a little bit later, a terrifying story of a father's struggle to keep the right to parent his own children.
She's a pediatrician, and using her connections with licensed care providers, she was able to get psychologists to basically force me out of my house.
And that's when the situation escalated again. Jeff, who then still had 50-50 custody, took this video of James when he was only 3 years old.
You're a boy, right?
No, I'm a girl.
Who told you you're a girl?
Mommy.
But first, what happened to an Arizona man when the ATF showed up for a routine inspection?
We are not going away until we pass legislation to stop gun violence.
Historic gun safety legislation is now law.
They have been designed to kill a lot of human beings quickly.
Democrats have made it beyond clear that they're no fan of guns. They've made it increasingly difficult to obtain one in blue states.
I'll be signing a bill that will allow Californians to sue irresponsible gun manufacturers and distributors.
And now they're making it hard to keep guns if you already own.
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47.
But only 7% of gun crimes involve a legally owned gun. So Why then are they so hell-bent on taking them away from us?
Tyrants disarm the people they intend to oppress.
Rural California. Little boy named David grew up learning what I think all kids should understand. Guns don't have to be scary.
My father was an avid hunter, so I have a picture of me somewhere when I was probably about 6 weeks old. My father was on a hunting trip, and I was in a little baby car carrier, and they had the shotgun across my lap. We did hunter safety as soon as I was of age. We did shooting courses with the Boy Scouts, got my merit badge for my Eagle Scout awards.
After college, David joined the Army. He was there for 10 years, but his appreciation for the Second Amendment extended well past his military career. It was personal.
At this point in my life, I found that helping other people reach that kind of personal security was just, kind of a little bit more important, kind of an extension of my oath as a soldier.
David asked a question on Facebook about a specific gun, and another soldier from a previous deployment reached out. Their conversation sparked the next chapter of both of their lives. And that's where David, his wife, and family are now, running and growing the Phoenix-based store Black Metal Firearms.
Good morning, metalheads. So we're open for Black Friday. I've got receivers for days. All of our forged lowers are going to be $10 off. All of our forged uppers are $10 off.
But owning a gun store goes hand in hand with strict government oversight.
Any store or guns license holder that has business hours is allowed to be audited once per year without notification.
Black Metal Firearms inspection arrived first thing in the morning one day last December.
So we put out our things, got everything ready, and started getting the books out for the investigator, Pamela Scott. And she just started doing her inspection. In the very beginning, it started off fairly benign, and it just got weirder and weirder as she took longer and longer with the inspection.
Weird. Like she started using her personal cell phone to take pictures of their gun logs.
So what's going on there is she is sitting there with my A&D book, going through page by page, copying everyone's personal information, including the firearms that they have purchased. She is a member of the United States Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Bureau. So all of your personal data is being scoured by the government. It is being definitely digitally recorded because she's using a digital camera to do that. And it's actually her personal phone too, which makes it even better.
She grilled the store owners for not having their records digitized. And she had some really kind things to say about David's customers.
She was going through and she said, I see you have quite a few regulars and you have a few gun nuts in here. And I kind of laughingly said, I'm like, we prefer the term gun enthusiasts. And she goes, no, they're nuts.
But gun stores are not the only target of this type of ATF behavior, as we recently saw in Delaware.
Verifying that you have it. You got 2 different purchases. If you have them, I'm out of here. That's how quick it is. Yeah. You have them with you by any chance? Are they? If you can unload them and bring them out, or you can go out to your foyer here, check them out, by serial number, and we're out of here.
David believes this will become much more ordinary.
I have a feeling many of your viewership will find themselves in a similar situation in the next few years or less.
So David, where does your case stand?
I wish I could give you an answer on that at this point, because our shop is its own problem as far as licensure. She was not very thrilled with the end result of our investigation, or her investigation of our store.
So what did she find that bothered her?
Where to begin? She definitely looked at a lot of our customers with a degree of contempt and suspicion. And beyond that, it turned into a pile of clerical errors that were just used to pad a report to justify revocation.
So I've heard that this is happening to gun stores all over the country where
it's up about 500%.
Honest mistakes are, what'd you say?
It's up about 500% revocations under this administration.
Right, and so what they're doing is they're taking honest mistakes, which have always been, everybody's gonna make a mistake, especially doing that much paperwork. But if it's an honest clerical error, it has always been overlooked. But now they're using those to say, you should lose your license.
I wouldn't say they're overlooked, but they were allowed to make corrections, and we did correct things that were made wrong. But at this point, it's no longer about the correction, it's about the removal. They're trying to find a way to get rid of licensed vendors across the country because they can't go after your guns, but they can go after your ability to get them.
When you talk to your clients that came in the store and bought guns, and they found out that all of their records were now being reviewed by the United States government and photographed on somebody's personal cell phone, what did they say to you?
A few of them were upset with us, less so, I think, than with the situation. We actually found the complaint department on the ATF's website to make light of this for our customers. And so that was put out there for them to go to the ATF's website and file a complaint. We found out shortly afterwards that the ATF's website was amended to remove that, because I guess they used to have a complaint form. They switched it now to just a phone number where a duty officer will answer the phone and give you feedback, or at least take your report for the mishandling of information. A few of our clients are, of course, law enforcement, police officers, and they know the system a little bit better as far as how to file a complaint. And the feedback we got from them that it was an extremely hostile phone call, very dismissive, and I don't really know how to further describe it.
So let me start with you, Mike. This is not a question of Second Amendment. This really sounds like a question of an administrative state gone bad.
Yes. You have fused into one agency the power effectively to make law and then to enforce that same set of laws. Now, for hundreds of years, we've understood that it's not just that leads to tyranny, that is the definition of tyranny. When an agency can make law and enforce the same law that they make, that's a problem. It's compounded here by the fact that it's a federal authority, even though, people typically possess and use firearms in one state at one time. It's not necessarily something that ought to require comprehensive regulation at the federal level, but regardless, this agency is making law and enforcing it under the same roof. This really is messed up, because when you do that, that ends up spilling over onto freestanding constitutional rights, protections. It ends up chilling, influencing, deterring, and in effect punishing the Second Amendment right to bear arms. Because when you can harass someone who owns a gun shop, who is a federally licensed firearms dealer like this, you make it more difficult for people to wield that right, to obtain those weapons.
So this is happening also. I've had reports from people that are shipping ammunition, companies that are shipping ammunition with UPS, and millions of rounds are just disappearing. And nobody seems to be pursuing it. Nobody seems to be doing anything. And the people who have purchased the ammunition are upset. The people who have sent the ammunition is upset, but nobody seems to do. And it leaves you with this feeling, again, of a collusion between the government and big business.
And that's why when we look at constitutional violations or actions that might chill or deter the exercise of constitutional rights, they rarely stand alone. They always come in pairs, if not a trio or a quartet. So here you've got things like that disappearing. You've got action to deter this kind of behavior. And then you've got property disappearing. That is a constitutionally protected right insofar as government is involved in that, or government is looking the other way in response to that. That's yet another constitutional right that's being infringed.
Okay, so how does the dealership live with this? And when the FBI or the ATF comes to your home and says, hey, I just have some paperwork here, I just need to see your guns, what do you do?
Yeah, so if you are a federally licensed firearms dealer, you are subject to these annual audits. It's unfortunate that they're being used like this, and this is going to call for additional hearings, additional scrutiny by Congress into how they're handling things. And I look forward to those very conversations. In time, I believe we need to divest the ATF of its rulemaking power, because they're acting as a legislative body. And then when they change the laws to suit their interest, to make it easier for them to get away with stuff like this, they can then abuse it because they're also the enforcement agency.
So when
you're in charge of the Senate. I'll look forward to that happening. In the meantime, Andrew, what do you do as an individual?
I think there's two things that I would recommend. First of all, if you're a dealer, unfortunately, because you have that license that's been granted to you by the government, anytime you're in a licensed industry, you have to obey the rules of that industry or go out of business. So I think the solution there is to probably learn the rules better than the inspector, right? You need to know the manual inside and out. So when there is something that the inspector is saying they can do or whatnot, I'm not criticizing Dave by any means.
But you did, right? And you were kind of put in your place.
We've been through quite a bit of it. And I think the biggest concern is that the solution in the modern age is to digitize everything. Everything has to go digital. There's so many companies out there that make digital software to track firearms, to track the paperwork and things like that, to basically make you error-free. The catch of that, of course, is that now your digital software, all of your data records are very easily taken. And I think that's part of why this audit went so sideways. Because when we handed her file boxes of physical paperwork, 4,000 plus entries, she was not happy. But she had plenty to talk about all these other audits that were flawless that she had.
And I applaud a dealer trying to respect your client's privacy. I think that's one of the important themes we'll hear tonight is privacy and trying to protect your own data. So I think that's admirable to try to not use that software to try to keep the data secure in-house. But I think that's the key is to learn the rules and follow the rules even better than the inspector knows herself, right? I think that's the key in any of this administrative red tape.
I think it's kind of, in just reading and talking to a lot of gun dealers, I think that's really unreasonable for the amount that they are processing. I mean, they're being nailed on the date was wrong, or the zip code or the city was wrong, on little teeny things that have always been allowed to be corrected when they're found. And it's kind of unreasonable to think that somebody's going to be perfect.
Absolutely. I see a lot of times in state court, we see people applying for firearms who are charged with felonies for checking the wrong box on the firearm form.
Unless your last name's Biden.
Exactly, unless your last name is Biden. So we have it on both ends of the spectrum, the consumers and the dealers being hammered on these little technicalities, and it's obviously a problem with the administrative state.
So, Janine, can you help me with, if somebody comes knocking at your door? Somebody comes knocking at your door, I mean, does anybody have that? What do you do when they come knocking at your door?
Well, in his case, I mean, the problem is that the statute that sort of gives the ATF authority allows for these warrantless searches. I mean, in my opinion, this is a violation of the Fourth Amendment, and Congress shouldn't be able to delegate to the agency authority that contradicts the Constitution. So if you were, very adventurous, I would challenge that in court and argue that it's a Fourth Amendment violation. The Supreme Court these days is more skeptical of agencies' power, so there may be some chance if you have the right set of facts.
If I may add, you mentioned people showing up, the gun inspectors at people's residences. I think for the people at home, that's probably a very concerning thing. People who've bought guns legally and the ATF knocking on the door asking to see your guns. I think the answer is no thank you, and you close the door if you even opened it in the first place. If they don't have a warrant, they don't need to come inside, and they certainly don't need to see your guns.
So maybe we can get into this. We have an FBI agent, whistleblower, with us. But, the tendency for most Americans is when you have an officer at the door, you want to help them. I mean, that's the way we are, but that is the biggest mistake you can make, right?
100%.
A few years ago, a lot of people felt that way. There were a lot of lawyers who even might have told people, depending on the circumstances, you may want to. In this day and age, I don't know a single lawyer who would advise people to do that. And that's sad. It's a sad commentary. It's also sad that, we have this intense regulatory body that focuses on this one industry. If we're really focused on public safety, why not go after people who misuse that right? Why not prosecute people who do bad things with guns? We don't have regulatory bodies to deal with other constitutional rights the same way we have ATF, even though there are other constitutional rights that, if abused, can result in people being harmed, or in some cases seriously. And so one has to wonder what the purpose of this intense regulatory scrutiny is, focused on the exercise of a constitutional right. Is it about keeping people safe? If so, how many people are made safer? How many lives are saved through this? Or is it about something else?
Okay, coming up, we're going to find out what it's like to have the FBI raid your home. Watch.
They never even got close enough to the Capitol to really see what was going on.
We just observed from outside. We only had about 30 minutes before we had to go catch a plane.
They returned home. Life was normal, and the Alaskan peace surrounded them once again. Until that April morning.
But first, a story about gender madness and a parent's worst nightmare.
That moment, the doctor places your newborn into your arms. Your entire world changes. I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe. I'll fight for you every single day. For Jeff, that moment arrived times 2 when his twin boys, James and Jude, were born. And from the start, Jeff loved being a dad.
I was the stay-at-home parent for them. I've raised them since they were the youngest children. And we were very close and had a super tight bond right up until the courts took them away from me.
Everything changed when the boys were 2 years old. Jeff's then-wife began telling James that timeouts were only for little boys, and that
the monsters only eat boys, you better not be a boy, scaring him in these little timeouts. And when I put my foot down and stopped that, she filed for divorce almost immediately. She's a pediatrician, and using her connections with licensed care providers, she was able to get psychologists to basically force me out of my house.
And that's when the situation escalated again. Jeff, who then still had 50-50 custody, took this video of James when he was only 3 years old.
You're a boy, right?
No, I'm a girl.
Who told you you're a girl?
Mommy.
She puts dresses on you? Oh, wow. And what else does she do?
She buys my headbands.
Uh-huh.
And she get me hair clips.
Oh, hair clips? Okay.
She enrolled him in school as a girl under a fake girl's name. She started to claim that I couldn't cut my son's hair and that I couldn't use male pronouns. And she went to court to try to force me to use male pronouns at home, to stop presenting him to the world as a boy.
This evening, there's a decision to share in a volatile custody case involving a 7-year-old's gender.
Courtroom, this case has taken on a life of its own. The central question being, should a 7-year-old live as a boy or as a girl?
The custody battles continued, but Jeff's ex-wife used her connections with psychologists to force her hand. His 50-50 custody soon became every other weekend only.
This hurt the relationship between me and my sons tremendously. And my sons were very sad about it and cried about it all the time.
So James, now 10, has lived his short life in a whirlwind of confusion.
So there was a time when every authority figure in my son's life except me was telling him he was a girl. His teacher at school, the principal, the police officer at school, the librarian was telling him he was a girl, the lunch lady was telling him he was a girl. His brother, although he didn't want to, was forced to use his girl's name.
But there's one part of James's story that makes it even more tragic.
And here's the important thing to know about my case. My son has never presented as a girl to me. He only presents as a girl when he's with his mother. So my approach was just very simple, to show my son how great it is to be a man. So we just did all the things that I did as a boy. We hunted rabbits, we tracked animals, we did hikes. We didn't need to worry about. We were able to tough everything out. And my son flourished under these conditions.
On the weekends, Jeff shared with his sons his love for boxing.
You know, he didn't think he could make it through those first workouts, you know, and he saw that we could tough it out together. We would get down there and do our 1 hour of floor work, working on our abs, working on our core. And we could do all that together. In a boxing gym, everybody that does the work gets respect. And they enjoyed that. They were treated like young men.
Their time together shaped James immensely.
Became to understand themselves as in command of their world, able to make changes in their world. And this eventually culminated in my son refusing to wear a dress at his mother's home because he likes being a man. He told the court-appointed counselor that he wanted to be a boy and wanted to go to school as a boy. The court-ordered counselor, she said, well, this child is saying he wants to be a boy. That must be because the father's making him say that. And on that basis, she recommended that the court take the children away from me because my son asked to be a boy.
The boy's mother moved them to California, and Jeff says she's already beginning a full transformation for James. He last saw them over a year ago. But Jeff's battle is far from over. In fact, quite the opposite is true.
But I assure you, I will not stop fighting for my son under any conditions. We say, save James, save thousands of children, so we don't forget those other children.
He's fighting for more than just his son. He's fighting for James, but also for all the other kids whose parents just won't speak up.
And in my daily prayers, I always remember the other children and their parents who either can't or won't fight for them.
Save James. Save thousands. I can't even imagine how you feel, and especially since you were given a gag order, were you not? You were not allowed to speak to the media. You weren't allowed to even speak to lawmakers about your case.
That's right. This interview is illegal in the state of Texas. I was banned from publishing any blog posts, social media posts, publishing a newspaper article, doing any writing at all on about my situation. I was also permanently banned from doing interviews, doing podcasts, appearing on television interviews, and these are all specifically laid out. I was also banned from speaking on 3 political topics. I'm not allowed to talk about anything about transgender issues, gender expansiveness, or whether my son is a boy or a girl. And I have told this judge, and I tell this judge every time I do an interview, I will never follow your illegal and unconstitutional order. I have contempt for her as a judge for issuing the order. I have maximum contempt for the tyrannous language of the order, and I will never follow the order. I'm guilty of maximum criminal contempt in the 301st District Court of the state of Texas, and she's obligated to put me in jail for the maximum sentence, which is 180 days in the Lou Sterrett Jail in Dallas County. 4 days later, I'll be in the jail library with the writ of habeas corpus that I have already prepared. We will go to the 5th District, and we will see who's right. I'll appear in handcuffs, her in the judge's robe, but I'm not taking this tyranny, and I'm not going to stop speaking out about my son.
Wow. Is he right?
Yes. We talked a minute ago about the fact that constitutional violations often come in pairs or trios or more. That's happening here. He's got rights. Troxel versus Granville, a case decided 22 years ago by the U.S. Supreme Court, acknowledges that he's got due process interests in raising his child. And he's also got First Amendment rights. Those are both being eroded by this order. Now, it's a little bit more complicated on the due process analysis, especially here where you've got 2 parents and they have different approaches. But in this circumstance, you have one parent who is coercively coaxing the child in a way that I can only characterize as abuse. This is child abuse and should be acknowledged as such.
So, yeah, go ahead.
It's true.
So, what do you do for a living?
I'm an applied mathematician. My educational background's in philosophy and mathematics.
Okay. And so you were not prepared legally to go through any of this.
Not in the slightest.
What have you learned, or what would you either do that you didn't, or not do that you did right at the beginning?
I have some very specific things. When I ran for office in the state of Texas, I ran partially on a platform to reform family law, and it was based on the things that I learned. The first thing is that all the state actors, but especially the judges, will try to trick you into voluntarily waiving your constitutional rights. They will try to do this by putting you on the record saying things that you shouldn't say.
Like?
For example, when they were issuing this gag order, they held it up to me, and at that time I was pro se to save money, because I've spent $1.7 million right now.
Jeez.
So I try to save money. Well, it kept my son from being chemically castrated, so it was money well spent. So she held up this order and says, do you agree that this is the order for the last hearing? And I said, well, I've read the procedure manual, and I said, I agree as to form, but I do not agree as to content. In fact, I object. Now, had I said, yes, I agree that that's the order and I will sign it, in Texas, I would have waived all rights to really challenge much of that. I have to agree only as to form. Other things that they'll try to do is judges will ask you questions. Do you think that maybe there's some problems with the fact that you're speaking out publicly? And they'll use that to say, well, you must have known it wasn't in their interest. They do things like that. In another case, I was given supervised visitation because I wouldn't obey the gag order, mainly because I was running for public office. And so I wanted to talk about this issue. It's part of my platform. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons they issued the gag order was to prevent me from running for office and changing the laws and limiting the judicial discretion in this state. So one of the things that they tried to do to me was they said, well, we're going to take your sons away from you, but you can have less supervised visitation than convicted pedophiles at $600 per 2-hour visit twice a month. And oh, by the way, if you don't do that, we're going to say that you abandoned your son. And then I go and call the transgender psychologist who's supervising my sessions, and he says, you can't take your son out of a dress at these visits. And I said, sir, I don't participate in child abuse with my son. And no court, no government official, nobody in a professional body can order me to abuse my son, and I'm not going to do that. So on that basis, the judge has now concluded, since I haven't abused my son at supervised visits, I have abandoned him, and has allowed my ex-wife then to move to California. 4 days this order was issued, the memorandum order, 4 days after California passed Senate Bill 701, which made California a sanctuary state. So if my children cross the state line into California, a judicial court in California must take emergency jurisdiction over my son. They will not obey Texas subpoenas. They will not return my son to me, and they can medically transition him without the consent of either parent. And a Texas judge allowed my son to go to a foreign jurisdiction to be castrated. That is the level of judicial tyranny that we're talking about in this country and in the state right now.
What is the state of your son now?
So I haven't seen him in a year and a half, but I write him lots of letters. He's written me a couple of letters. I get little signals from him. He wrote a letter to me and said, Dad, my name is Luna. And I was like, that's odd, because he doesn't want to be a girl. So I flipped over the address, and he wrote his name is James on the return address. That's these little messages that I get from him. And he's told the court 40 counselors repeatedly that the reason he identifies as a girl with his mom is she doesn't love him unless he's a girl.
Okay, Janine, this is the worst nightmare of every parent. Where do you even begin on this?
Well, I guess where I usually begin, which is, I would say, file a lawsuit in federal court. The family courts are terrible, often in this and other issues. I mean, as the senator identified, you have a due process right to parent your child as you see fit. Of course,
wait. But you haven't, it's not in the Constitution.
Well,
this is kind of slippery, isn't it?
It's an unenumerated right, which is recognized as substantive due process, but there's a historical tradition. So I know that substantive due process has people feel differently about it. Some people don't like the concept because that's also where abortion rights come from. But I think the right to parent your own child is a clearly established historical right. There's not really much question that we've recognized that in our culture for centuries.
We are losing that as science is now follow the science. He clearly is not a boy. He's clearly a girl, and he can eventually have babies. All this science nonsense
So you have science, and you have the courts, and you have the school districts. You have this whole apparatus that really believes that my child, your child, is their child. It's the state's child, or it's the community's child.
I'm not sure. I think a lot of federal courts would not be prepared to go that way. I think there are a lot of courts that would be protective of a parent's right, especially in this circumstance. I mean, this is a new thing. I mean, we've never had performing surgery on children, unnecessary surgery, chopping off body parts. This is a totally new concept, and I think it's relatively untested in the courts, and I believe that many courts, maybe not in California, but many would see things your way.
So have you, where does it stand? Have you taken it to federal court yet? Have you?
So here's another little machination that lawyers use and the courts use to prevent you from getting into federal court. So Texas has a special statute which prevents you from appealing temporary orders in family law cases. So you can only go up on a mandamus standard. That's first of all. 97% of mandamus requests are not even heard by courts. They're discretionary, unlike an appeal. So it allows the lower courts to do that. Now, one good advantage that you do have is that you can go to the Texas Supreme Court de novo, right? So you do have a chance to go up there, and I'm definitely going to do that, but I have to go through this whole appellate process. But let me give you an example of abusive process. Opposing counsel, this is a Coonsville law firm here in Texas, most powerful family law firm in the state of Texas, arguably the most powerful law firm in the state of Texas, has been ordered to produce the final order. They have delayed doing that now for a month and a half. And the reason is they're letting her move to California before they produce the final order, because I can't mandamus it until I have a final order. So there's an abusive process that the judge won't rectify. So they have there's a lot of things in, you're lawyers, you know that procedural values are real values in a lawsuit. And so in Texas, there are a lot of ways they can make it very difficult and expensive. And I expect it to cost a couple $100,000 to get up to the Texas Supreme Court. I'm probably going to be the first federal challenge of this crazy sanctuary law in California. So I'm planning on spending $500,000 to get up to the U.S. Supreme Court.
You're a mathematician. What kind of money are you pulling down to be able to? I should have studied more in math.
3 jobs. I work 3 jobs. I work 3 jobs and I run my own business. That's 4. That's what I do.
Cow.
That's what I do. Well, it's my son.
I know. I would do the same thing.
What are you going to do, man? It's only money. And I had a fairly large retirement, which I've almost gone through. But it's only money. I mean, sure, it's not as important as your kid by any means. But what I'm saying is a lot of people don't have those resources or can't make that kind of money, right? Can't generate the kind of political power that I generated in the legislature to coerce the governor to address this issue in the agencies. A lot of people can't do that, and they're just not going to go anywhere. They're not going to make it even to the appellate level.
When this stuff happens, Mike, we do not have a constitutional republic. You hear these 3 stories. This is not America. This is the Bill of Rights and the Constitution don't seem to play any real role. Nothing seems to be protecting the little guy. Everything seems to be geared to protect the big guy.
Remember, Glenn, at the founding of our country, we were given certain warnings. The rule of law and a constitutional republic can survive only as long as people are willing to be decent and to have some agreed upon standards of what acceptable behavior is. If you have a society that reaches the point where they redefine child abuse to be non-child abuse, those things can evaporate in a hurry. Now, I've got more confidence in the state of Texas than to think that their judicial system won't rectify this. And if there ever were a proper case for a petition for an extraordinary writ of mandamus, I would think this would be it.
Yes.
I hope and I will pray that you get that.
Thank you.
Stay with us, because later we're going to hear from an FBI whistleblower who is speaking out about the agency abuses that he has witnessed himself and would not take part in. Next, what's it like when the FBI shows up in your living room with their guns drawn? Is this political persecution?
We met in La Mesa, California, outside of San Diego. We were married in 1990. So we lived there till the mid-90s and decided that we were really more designed for small town living.
Marilyn and Paul Huper moved their family over 2,000 miles just to find some peace and quiet in the beautiful wilderness of Alaska. They became innkeepers, providing others a glimpse into the paradise that they were now able to call home. But that quiet retreat turned into absolute chaos one early April morning. But first, let's back up. Paul has always enjoyed politics, but Marilyn, not so much. But as they watched the 2020 election results unfold, both felt that something seemed off.
The president-elect is running into some issues with his transition to the White House. This comes as President Donald Trump and his legal team push claims of voter fraud in several key battleground states.
Plus, they were away from home already on vacation in Arizona.
Marilyn looked up the tickets and went, wow, it's only $39 per person round trip from Phoenix to D.C. Let's go to D.C.
We've never been to a rally. We've never heard a president speak. It felt like the right thing to do was to go and listen and lend our support.
Chaos at the Capitol.
The deadly siege on Congress as an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol.
A woman who was shot and killed inside the U.S. Capitol today during the riots.
Someone has died.
But this was far from the Hupers' experience in D.C. They never even got close enough to the Capitol to really see what was going on.
We just observed from outside. We only had about 30 minutes before we had to go catch a plane.
They returned home. Life was normal, and the Alaskan peace surrounded them once again. Until that April morning.
I could hear a loud banging on the far side of the house away from where we were, and a loud male voice barked out, "FBI, come out with your hands up." Come around the corner, and I had 6-7 guns pointed at my head. It's the first time I ever looked down a loaded barrel of a gun. He got kind of rough with me and said, "Move forward, turn around," and they slapped handcuffs on me behind my back.
They took Marilyn into a separate room, but unlike her husband, Marilyn almost immediately could sense why these men were inside her home.
We were part of a credit card company that had been reported as turning in information for people who booked tickets or used the card for lodging during the J6 weekend. So I had just put down on a list next to my bed, I put a little box, and next to it, find out what to do if the FBI contacts you. The very first thing probably out of their mouth was, "So you probably know why we're here." I said, "Absolutely not." And they said, "Well, we're here looking for Nancy Pelosi's laptop." What does that have to do with me?
Eventually, an agent showed Marilyn a picture of a woman they believed to be her.
Then I grabbed the paper and I said, "Is this who you're looking for?" Because I'm not an expert or anything, but she has detached earlobes and I have attached earlobes. That's a different person.
The agents continued their search of the Huper home, but eventually realized, whoops, it's a mistake. Before they left, Marilyn asked who she should contact about their broken, kicked-in door.
And he said, "Oh yeah, we don't do that. The courts never hold us accountable. We don't have to do that. You can try, but they won't make us." That's kind of kindergarten 101. If you break something, if you harm somebody, if you make a mistake, you apologize, and then you fix it. And he said, "Yeah, we're the FBI. We don't do that."
Marilyn and Paul join me now. Thank you for coming all the way from Alaska. I know that's between flying from Alaska, through Alaska, and to Texas, through Texas, it's been a long ride, I know. Thank you. You told me this story 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, it seems. And you were a different person when we first spoke, Marilyn. You are not the one that is always involved in politics. And the next time I spoke to you, you were a scholar on the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Am I
Well, thank you. I am studying pretty much every day and listening to anyone I can listen to who agrees and disagrees with each other, and then I'm trying to test everything live. So whenever I am in front of an enforcer or have an opportunity in the court, which seems to be abundant these days, I'm just road testing everything.
So even though they were wrong about you, you're still having problems, like when you travel, is that right?
Well, we were suddenly given a special designation anytime we attempted to board a plane of the SSSS. And those who have that special designation will know.
What is an SSSS?
Special selective something.
Yes.
Basically terrorist watch list kind of like stuff?
Yes.
Okay, good.
If you ask them, they'll say it's a random selection, but after 12 flights in a row, it's clear it's not very random.
Okay.
So, yeah, so we did do a redress process where we asked them, again, I asked them, like, thank you for your special designation. We require proof of claim, however, that there's some probable cause for such a special designation, and the response back that we received with our redress number that now has successfully allowed us to travel without obstruction was like, oh, we don't know why that was. Must have been a mistaken identity or a random event. So, yeah.
When you were separated, what did you think was going on? Paul, what did you think?
I still was in a state of being perplexed. I had no idea why they were there. I had no idea why they took her off to the other room. And they kept me handcuffed and in the dark for about an hour and a half. And
were they questioning you over and over?
No, not at all.
Not at all.
No,
Pleasant
eventually,
for you.
they just opened up a book and, okay, is this a picture of you on the steps going up to the Capitol? I'm like, yeah, we're 100 yards away, so what? And I didn't know until they showed pictures of somebody that was supposed to be Marilyn in this little folder. And, well, that's not my wife, and no, we were not inside the Capitol. Then it started to make sense what they were up to.
And what were they asking you the whole time?
Well, immediately after they separated us, I don't think I had even sat down in the other room yet. They said, well, you probably know why we're here. And I said, no, absolutely not. And they said, we're here looking for Nancy Pelosi's laptop. And if I had been drinking something, I'm sure I would have spit it out laughing. And I said oh, wow, that really is a thing. So it was taken and it is at large. Good to know. Thanks for the intel. Why are you here? Why do you think I have anything to do with this?
And they found it, did they not? In Virginia, I believe.
They found the woman that they had mistaken me for.
Okay.
I don't believe the laptop has ever been discussed again.
Probably with the fake Hunter Biden laptop.
Probably so. Right.
So when we were talking earlier, you were talking, I think it was Anna was in the room, and you said, I've got my writ of habeas corpus right in my pocket. And what I didn't want to say to either of you, because you both looked at each other like, yeah, right? I don't even really know what a writ of habeas corpus is. What is it?
So I had another opportunity after the FBI. I've had lots of enforcer opportunities since then, because you kind of become, you become on a list of interest for many or agencies and attorney firms. So I had an opportunity to visit the inside of a jail cell since then. And one of the things that
it sounds nice, doesn't it?
It actually was a very new facility.
Yeah, right.
It was a new facility. And it was another place I had put on my list, like, hey, see what it's like inside of you'll visit a department and see what it's like inside of a cell, because one of the things is that there's fear of the unknown. So when the FBI left...
So you weren't arrested. You're not using a euphemism. You weren't arrested. You just wanted to see the inside of a jail cell.
I put it on a list, kind of like I put find out what to do with if the FBI contacts you. I put on the list, hey, find out what inside of a jail cell looks like.
Okay.
And it turns out I got to see the inside of what it looks like.
Okay.
So I was like, I have to stop putting things on lists, basically, obviously. No more checklists. So one of the things that happened when I was there is I contacted someone who's knowledgeable counsel, and they said, like, ask them for paper and pencil. I was like, okay, now what? And she said, okay, so now put this at the top of the paper, put this in the middle of the paper, put this on the left side, put this on the right side, put your what happened down. So I just right live time created a writ of habeas corpus, and all of the agents started jumping up and down and claiming I was trying to get them fired and became very afraid. And I was like, wow, whatever this is, I'm going to learn how to do this.
So, Mike, what is it?
A writ of habeas corpus is a civil action that goes on top of or after a criminal proceeding. And the idea is to get the body held by a person and get that body removed, or alternatively force the government to provide a justification for why that body is incarcerated.
Okay, so you have to show us how to write one of those.
Yes, I would love to.
Before you leave. I think we should all have one, because you said you always walk around with one now.
Well, when I travel now, I don't have one on me right now because I changed my clothes, but when I'm traveling any distance from home, and especially if I'm getting on a plane, I'll create one before I go with the agencies that I might be encountering, so I can kind of circle or check those off.
So what did you learn? Definitely don't do this, both of you. What did you learn that you shouldn't do?
Oh man, be quiet. Just be quiet. We just weren't equipped. We weren't ready for anything like this to happen. And so you want to cooperate, you want to be the law-abiding citizen and so forth, and so you get diarrhea of the mouth and you just say whatever they want you to say.
Right.
And that would be our number one mistake that we learned real quick in the process afterwards, to retain the things that are natural for you to want to say and say as little as possible.
Yeah, and I would say what I've learned through other enforcer interactions, that there's a finesse to declining to share information so that declination can't be used against you. So you want to say you're happy to cooperate, would love to share lots of information with you. However, could this be used against me in a court of law, by the way? So if that's so, then I'd love to have my counsel present. So let's make an appointment and I can answer all your questions. We'll have a delightful time.
And you do that.
Absolutely.
So they don't get hostile. You stay friendly and happy. Otherwise, they can use it against you?
The courts have changed recently. It used to be that you could just assert your right to remain silent and not recuse yourself, and that couldn't be admissible into the courts. Now the courts are accepting that as a testimony from the agent, like, oh, you encountered this individual, you tried to engage with them, what did they do? Oh, well, they were very hesitant. They didn't want to share any information. They declined to talk to us. So painting broad brush strokes of suspicion. So if you stay amenable and smiley and cooperative, then they can't use that.
How big is your town in Alaska?
About 10,000.
So having the FBI fly in from Washington, or it had to be a big deal. It had to be in the front page of the paper.
Oh yeah.
What's the reaction now?
We're a mixed town.
Even some of our closest friends hold us at suspicion now, which is unfortunate. It's like either you're a friend of mine or you're not. Maybe you weren't the friend that I thought you were. We've got a very supportive church group, very supportive circle of friends and family, and we run into people, ran into somebody in the airport on the way here that all of a sudden wanted to have nothing to do with us. It's really fascinating to see.
And is that because they just don't know about you, or they're afraid if I'm friends with you, I'm going to be on a list?
It's both. I've had friends who walked away for a long time. They were just scared to death the FBI was going to come after them because of their connection to us.
Okay. Let's start with you.
To me, I think the two takeaways that they both have are pretty much what I would echo, frankly. Be quiet. My kind of thing I repeat to everyone is don't talk to the police. Oftentimes, the police or the FBI, whoever it is, they need your cooperation. They bluff their way into many arrests and convictions by having you fill in the holes that they don't know, and they need your cooperation. But
this is something that I think people on the right have to learn, because we have always been friends. We're not lawbreakers. We've always thought the police were our friends, and so they stop, and you're like, oh, yeah, sure, officer. Well, yeah, absolutely. But that's not to be done now.
I don't think so, but that's where I think Marilyn's advice comes in, is be polite. You don't have to be a jerk to the police. You don't have to spit at them, and obviously you don't do that. But you don't have to be a jerk to assert your rights. You can say, I'm sorry, officer, I'm going to invoke the Fifth, and just be quiet. And literally be quiet. You don't have to keep repeating yourself that you're invoking the Fifth. You don't have to keep repeating yourself. You just have to be quiet. I think that's the key takeaway.
When they put you in handcuffs, did either one of you say, I think I should have an attorney here?
No, I think we both thought like, oh, well, this must be a mistake. We can clear this up.
Wow.
Yeah. So our house is attached to, our private house is attached to our guest house. So our immediate thinking is like, do we have a guest here who's involved in something? Is this because, who knows what, you're trying to go through your mind what they might be mistaken about. And then one of the other things I discovered is that it's not unusual for them to ask questions they know that they're asking the wrong question to get you to correct them and get you talking. So,
what do you mean, for example?
For example, they might say something like, they thought I was inside the Capitol. I think they legitimately thought I was inside the Capitol. But they might say you were inside the Capitol when they know you never entered. Because they go, oh, no, I didn't go inside. Okay. But now you've admitted you were in proximity. Okay. So that's what we did. They said like, well, we know you were inside the Capitol. I'm like, oh, I can fix this. No, we didn't go inside the Capitol. And they're like, you were outside the Capitol? I was like, well, yeah, we were distance. Perfect. It's exactly the same crime for being outside the Capitol that day. I'm like, oh, great.
Wow.
So you just can't trust the questions.
I think that's exactly right. They try to mislead you, misdirect. I think the other takeaway here is, if we go back to the beginning of the story about how they might have identified in part Marilyn in the first place, was I think some social media photos the FBI latched onto. And I think part of the other answer for some of these issues is privacy. Thinking about what we're putting online for Amazon and all these places to be indexing and keeping records on us, and also the FBI or informants, our friends, saying, oh yeah, she's in the most wanted booklet from January 6th. That's her, look at these photos. Because we put everything on social media, we're open books. We're exposing ourselves to a lot of these things, and I think we have to be more conscious of that. And frankly, maybe not being on some of these platforms is a good idea.
Mike, we all know the DOJ is out of control. The FBI seems to be dirty, at least at the top. Is there anything we can do? I mean, let's just assume you don't, with the vote coming back, you don't have anything, House or Senate. Is there anything that can be done at that level while we try to prepare at our level?
While we're in the minority, and while the majority party refuses to ask questions of the Department of Justice, our powers are relatively limited. Now, we can still ask them questions. We have routine oversight hearings involving the FBI, the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, the FBI Director, and so forth. I've personally asked them a lot of questions about investigations like these ones. What has happened is that they don't answer. And they'll run out the clock, and when I've got a 5-minute timer, sometimes as many as 7 minutes on the timer. When that clock runs out, the chairman of the committee gavels me out, and they move on to the next person. It would change if gavels shifted. If Republicans win the majority, we'll be able to run that clock as long as we want. We'll be able to provide consequences to them if they don't answer our questions. But I've got questions that have been pending for 2.5 years in some cases on these and many other issues. And it's a real problem when you have a genuine lack of intellectual curiosity, a genuine lack of concern about the erosion of constitutional rights within the legislative branch. And you've got the legislative branch becoming a rubber stamp for the executive branch.
So is it true that the FBI has to come and at least alert the county sheriff that they are going to conduct a raid in that county? Is that true? Does anybody know?
It's the standard practice. Typically, that's what they do. I don't believe that there's a law that requires that. I do believe it's the standard practice.
I don't think it is anymore. Do you know?
I don't think there's a law. I agree with the senator, and I really don't think it's. I think if the FBI knows that the county is maybe not supportive, I don't think they are going
I've talked to
alert them.
sheriffs before where the FBI has gone in recently and conducted raids, and they're like, didn't get a phone call.
And the sheriff certainly has no power to stop federal law enforcement from enforcing federal laws just within their county. They're not the chief over everything that happens in that county, just over state laws.
So what is the first thing that you say we should do or know when they come knocking at the door, God forbid? They come knocking at the door, the best advice is just to be quiet and ask for your attorney?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, honey, I think we have attorneys, but I don't know who would we call? I mean, do you need a special kind of attorney? What do you need? I need an FBI attorney. They're at my door.
Just a defense attorney should do. But everybody might want to have a defense attorney on hand these days.
Sincerely?
Yeah.
It's good to know someone.
I'll give you
locally.
some names.
Okay, you can give me some names. Good. Yeah, good. Wow. Okay. Well, guys, thank you.
Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure being here.
All right. Coming up just a little later, you don't want to miss our live audience Q&A with our panel and all of our crooked friends, apparently. We have an FBI whistleblower who is also fed up with what's going on and the, let's call them, questionable raids that are happening.
Coming up, I'm joined by a man who refused to let the government tyrants dictate his life, his morals, and his oath.
FBI veteran and whistleblower Steve Friend was suspended, stripped of his gun and badge, and escorted out of the field office. His crime? Refusing to participate in SWAT raids that he said used excessive force against conservatives accused of misdemeanors on January 6th.
An FBI whistleblower who exemplifies the bravery we all need to take a stand against DC's all-powerful when our turn comes.
Our final guest tonight is an 8-year veteran FBI special agent who is currently on indefinite suspension. It happened in September. He was stripped of his gun and his badge and shown the door at the FBI field office in Daytona Beach, Florida. That's where he was based. Now, why did this happen? Because he refused to participate in what he says are a growing number of politicized raids that violate the FBI's own policy, not to mention the rights of us, the citizens. Since then, he has filed a whistleblower complaint with the Inspector General at the Department of Justice. He joins a growing number of recent whistleblowers calling foul on the FBI's alleged politicalization and malpractice. Welcome to the program, and thank you very much for having the guts to stand up, Steve Friend.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, tell me what happened. What is happening in the FBI?
Well, I think there's a combination going on where there's a politicization married to just rank raw ambition coming from headquarters. So when I got moved over into the national security side of the House, it had been some time had elapsed since January 6th. So I was coming in with a perspective of a criminal investigator. Unfortunately, what had gone up to that point was a national security investigation that was fueled by, from my perspective, folks in Washington, D.C. seeing the biggest case they could possibly get their hooks on and manipulating and, frankly, not following our rules when it came to conducting criminal investigations.
Like, for example, what?
Well, simply, if a case is opened up in the FBI, the office where it's opened is the office of origin. The agent that's running that case is the case manager. That case manager has carte blanche to control the case and really see it start to finish. I've seen that done, the 200 cases that I've opened in the FBI, every single time without fail, except for January 6th. With J6 cases, the cases were being referred to our office, say in Daytona. We were being the case managers on those cases, but we were getting directives for certain investigative actions to take from Washington, D.C.
So in other words, you were given the case, but you weren't in charge of it at all.
Correct. We were performing duties as if they were cutting us leads from Washington, which would have been acceptable if they were open in Washington. But when we would do those, we would send things back to Washington, D.C. and say, well, we're waiting on them to make a decision on what they want to do with it.
So what does that mean, like, when you would, because you would have been the head of the case, right?
Yes.
So you would have testified in a court if
it ever did reach trial, and that was really one of my primary concerns. I mean, I'm a competitive guy. I want to win. So if the person, committed a crime, I want to see them convicted at trial. And so I raised that concern to my supervisor, saying, look, I'm a case manager. Any first-year law student is going to call me up there as a defense attorney and say, Agent Friend, I see that you're the case agent on this case. Did you perform anything? And I would have to look at them and say, no, sir, I did not. To me, that would just spell doom for us.
So why were they doing this?
I asked that very question, and I was initially told that it was to get buy-in from the field. Now, I did not know what that meant.
Yeah, I was going to say, what does that mean?
But just in kind of getting familiar with the cases, I was able to sort of surmise that the proper way for us to open January 6 cases was one case, with lots of subfiles for every individual that they were going to investigate. Instead, the FBI elected to open up a separate case for every single person, making one case into 800 to 1,000 cases. Then spread them to the field, so now you have a bottom line number that is incredibly large. It's spiked throughout the entire country. That's going to support a narrative that domestic terrorism is a nationwide problem, when in fact it is all spawned off of a one-time incident.
Have you ever seen anything like this?
No.
Anything close?
Never.
I want to read something from the FBI because we reached out when you were going to be on the program. You're going to love this. The FBI told us, while we cannot comment on specific claims, the FBI is charged with protecting American people from a wide variety of threats, from terrorism, violent crime, hate crimes, crimes against children, to public corruption and cyber crimes. Our commitment to investigating one threat does not come at the expense of another. The threat posed by domestic violent extremists is persistent, evolving, and lethal. While the crimes at the U.S. Capitol of January 6 occurred in Washington, D.C., the reality is many of the people who committed the violent acts and other crimes that day traveled to the nation's capital from multiple jurisdictions across the country. The FBI investigates individuals who commit or intend to commit violence and other criminal activity that constitutes a federal crime or poses a threat to national security. We do not investigate ideology. We are committed to upholding the constitutional rights of all Americans and will never open investigation based solely on First Amendment activity. Respectfully, FBI National Press Office.
I find one part of that very interesting, that they investigate a wide variety. I was specifically assigned to investigate child exploitation, human trafficking, child pornography cases.
That's what you did before January 6th?
That's why I transferred to Daytona. I pursued that for about 10 weeks. At the end of the fiscal year, was told that I was going to be reassigned to work domestic terrorism for the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Those 10 weeks, I'd made a lot of promises to some local law enforcement partners, and I was pretty upset. And I said, how am I supposed to rectify this? And they said that those investigations were to be considered a local matter, and that I was going to concentrate my efforts on domestic terrorism because that was our top priority.
So when they say our commitment to investigating one threat does not come at the expense of another, you're saying that's not true?
Well,
in your case?
In my case, it was not true until recently. I actually learned that my office has since backfilled my role and has gotten a temporary agent to fill the role to investigate child exploitation. So I guess they deemed that that was a worthy violation now that that's been brought to light.
Okay, now that that's been brought to light. And your interaction with the investigator general, are they pursuing things? Do you feel like they're independent enough to?
So I submitted my complaint to the Office of Special Counsel and the Office of the Inspector General for the DOJ. I heard this week on Wednesday after the election that the Office of Special Counsel was not going to be considering my complaint any further. I fear that that is tied to potentially the election results, that there might not be any accountability if the Congress and the Senate can't hold hearings and the Special Counsel isn't going to consider it. I'm now at the mercy of the OIG to render a verdict on whether or not my whistleblower status and complaint is legitimate. But from what I understand in talking to my attorneys, that's very politicized and it could take for a very long time to come to a determination.
So where are more of you? I mean, I said this to a politician recently, and they said 24 whistleblowers. 24 have already come out. And I said, yeah, but that doesn't give me an awful lot of confidence in an organization that has tens of thousands of people. 24 is no big deal.
Correct.
Where are they?
So there's 14,000 agents. And in my heart of hearts, I really thought I was going to be having a Captain America Endgame scenario where I came forward and then I heard, on your left. And the cavalry came rushing in. And it has not happened, much to my chagrin. And to be totally frank, I'm incredibly tired of talking about the good men and women of the FBI. I took my oath and it meant something to me. I really wanted to protect the Constitution, to protect my countrymen, and I thought that I was going to be vetted as a person of integrity along with my colleagues. They have not stepped forward, and it has really saddened me.
Have any of them come to you even privately?
I've heard more from retired agents, but a few select messages here and there, but by and large, it has been complete silence.
And is that because of fear, do you think, or is that because they agree?
I think I've used the comparison of the person that goes to the free timeshare weekend. You and your buddy go. I walk away from the timeshare weekend with my free vacation and didn't get roped into that, and he got roped in. He's mad at that timeshare salesman, but he's really mad at me for not being suckered in. And I think that there's a little bit of resentment there. And I also think that there's a really great opportunity in the FBI to be overpaid and underworked, and it's a sweet gig. And a lot of people don't want to give up that paycheck.
All of the cases that you've heard here tonight, any of them surprise you at all?
It surprises me that if there was a federal agent, be it FBI, ATF, didn't just take a step to consider, their training and experience and just ask the basic question of, is this legal? Is this appropriate? And I always prided myself on, having integrity, but also having critical thinking ability. I thought that was something that was vital for, an investigator. It's not just following orders, sir, put your head down. You actually have to think through the facts to bring a case from start to finish and be successful. Critical thought is an integral component of that. And if there's no facts to support something, it doesn't need to start.
I believe that's where we got into trouble in Germany, is it not? I mean, didn't we decide that you can't just follow orders?
Right. There are limits to that. And the law has limits. The law imposes limits, and those limits have been thwarted. They've been overlooked. And there's a lack of accountability within the Department of Justice that I suspect is contributing to this. The Office of Inspector General in the Department of Justice is limited to what it can look into. Lawyers within the Department of Justice can't be investigated by the Office of Inspector General. They have to instead be investigated solely by the Office of Professional Responsibility, who's accountable to the Attorney General ultimately. It's the whole purpose of having offices of inspectors general within departments so that they can look into what's happening. When you exempt out every lawyer within the Department of Justice, including those involved in the FBI, you're going to have a problem. You'll compound that problem when the FBI is headed by a director, Christopher Wray, who refuses to answer any questions. All of this begs the question in my mind, is it really a good idea to have this much power, this much investigative and law enforcement power in one humongous federal agency?
No.
I think not.
No, I don't think the FBI has ever really lived up to what you thought you signed up for. I mean, Hoover was a monster of a guy. And they, now with the power that they have to gather intelligence, I mean, that's how he had the country by its throat. He gathered intelligence. Can you imagine just what we talked about with Amazon alone? The kind of information that they have at their disposal should they continue to partner with them.
Well,
go ahead.
I was going to say, his case also brings up something else that's really important, which is the government's involvement in social media censorship and what social media is doing. Because shortly after, we spoke earlier, and shortly after he made the report, it was your wife's account, right, was shut down on Facebook. And we know, that the FBI has been involved in this and telling Facebook and Twitter to shut down people's accounts and kick them off if they raise questions about the government's activities.
What was the excuse of Facebook kicking your wife off?
So she sent a private message to somebody who had reached out through a mutual friend asking what she could do to support me. My wife sent her a private message saying, just share his message, because at that point I hadn't come forward and there was no way to make it public. 30 minutes later, she received a message from Facebook saying that her account had violated community standards and it was suspended. She appealed immediately, and within 24 hours, it was completely disabled.
So just through a private message?
Yeah. So I'm actually working on a lawsuit with the Attorneys General of Louisiana and Missouri where we're alleging this sort of thing, that the government has been driving big tech censorship, which is the First Amendment violation.
Right.
And we've gotten discovery, which shows a high level of collusion, you could call it. We're calling it more coercion. Our argument is that the government is basically, given the power imbalance, is basically forcing them to do this. But it's really...
But I think they're kind of okay with doing a lot of it.
So I think it depends. From what I've seen, Facebook is a little bit more eager to work with the government than like Twitter and...
well, especially now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Right.
But I mean, it's really a problem for a private company to be acting as a government agent, basically. That should be considered a First Amendment.
This is the problem, though, that we're getting now compounded with ESG. Now the banks, all of the insurance companies, all of it is starting to roll right into the United States government. It is the biggest end run around our Constitution that I don't think our founders ever thought of. I don't think our founders ever saw that corporations could become more powerful or as powerful as a state.
I certainly don't think they anticipated that, or to the degree to which that's happened. I also think they never anticipated that the federal government would become big enough that it would be inclined to do those things. But fortunately, the constitutional standards we have are malleable enough, they're still applicable enough today to deal with this, because there is a line of precedent that suggests that once a corporation, a business operation, not a government, but once it takes on enough of the role of government, it's being used as a tool of the government, at some point it can become subject to the limitations of governments applicable under the First Amendment and otherwise.
Janine?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. That's what we're arguing in these cases. And there is a very strong body of case law in the Fourth Amendment context, but the First Amendment context, it's less developed, but we're hoping to be able to establish it with these cases.
Okay, we are going to go to our studio audience here, who has come to us with a lot of questions, and I'm sure has even more questions after they have heard this. We want to try to provide you with some answers. We're going to go to our first question from the audience. If you happen to be watching this special on social media, this episode ends here. However, you can go to blazetv.com/Glenn and look for Targets of Tyranny. There's about another half hour where we just speak to the experts. What is the best thing to do if any of these situations happen to you? Plus, the audience has questions of their own that I think you will relate to. You can find that again on blazetv.com/Glenn. And if you're not a subscriber, now is the best time to subscribe. We have 30% off if you go to blazetv.com/Glenn and use the promo code STANDUP. Thanks for watching, and see you over on the Blaze.